Hello and welcome to Seed World Strategy Webinar. Today we're going to take a look at the diseases and pathogens that wheat is most susceptible to, as well as some of the best prevention and treatment options. My name is Julie Deering. I serve as the editor of Seed World, and today I'll be serving as your moderator. First, I'd like to thank our sponsor, BASF, for their support. A few housekeeping items to note: this webinar is being recorded and will be made available on seedworld.com following the event. For audio quality purposes, all microphones have been muted with the exception of speakers, and if you have any questions or comments, please feel free to share them in the chat box and I'll make note of them. A quick rundown of how things are going to go today. First, we'll start with Stephen Wegulo and his report from the field, which will cover conditions in 2015-16, how this impacts the wheat crop, and the best options for prevention and treatment. At that point, we'll open it up to any questions for Stephen, as he can't be with us for the whole webinar due to prior obligations. Then we'll look at seed solutions from BASF. Justin Clark's going to talk about the products available, how they work, and when and where they work best. Then we'll open it back up for more questions. So let's go ahead and get started. After earning his master's and doctoral degrees in plant pathology from Iowa State University in 1994 and 1997, Stephen Wegulo went west and joined the University of California, Riverside as an extension specialist with a focus on ornamental crops. Then in 2005, he returned to the Midwest and teamed up with the University of Nebraska in the Department of Plant Pathology. As a professor and plant pathologist, Wegulo's research interests focus on cultivar resistance, epidemiology, and integrated management of plant diseases with an emphasis on wheat. He also has an extension appointment which includes developing and delivering client-targeted educational programs and the annual wheat disease surveys. Following Stephen, we'll hear from Justin Clark, who serves as a technical market specialist for BASF Crop Protection. As a member of the technical marketing team, Justin supports field research efforts and manages technical positioning, training, and product use recommendations for BASF seed treatment and seed enhancement products. These include Stamina and Stamina F3 cereals, fungicide seed treatments, Volt rhizobial inoculants, and other seed enhancement products. Justin began his career with Becker Underwood in 2009 in R&D field development with a focus on developing its cotton and peanut programs. He earned his bachelor's degree in agriculture and a master's of science in entomology and plant pathology from the University of Tennessee. And today he resides in Raleigh, North Carolina. So with that, we'll go ahead and dive on in. Stephen, the controls are all yours.
The title of my presentation this afternoon is Wheat Diseases and Prevention Treatment Options. I will start with a general introduction, and then I will talk about the major diseases of wheat we saw in Nebraska in 2015, and there are just two major ones, and I will explain why there are just two. And then the last part of my presentation is on the importance of wheat seed treatments. This is a map of the US showing the location of Nebraska right in the center where the red star is. And this is a map of Nebraska. And I wanted to show you this map to explain the great variability in climate in the state of Nebraska. In the Northwest, in the Panhandle, the average annual rainfall is about 16 to 17 inches per year, compared to just over double that amount in the Southeast. And so this has important implications regarding the types of diseases that we see in the state of Nebraska. In the eastern part, we have much more rainfall than in the western part. And also the elevation is very variable from about just over 800 feet in the Southeast to over 5,000 feet in the Northwest. So this again has implications on the types of diseases that we see. So I will start with just a general introduction here on plant diseases. And this slide shows on the left the groups of pathogens or disease-causing organisms that cause problems in wheat. There are four major groups of organisms or microorganisms that cause diseases in plants in general, the fungi, the bacteria, then viruses, and nematodes. Most of the wheat diseases that we see in Nebraska are caused by fungi, bacteria, and viruses. On the right of the slide, I have what we call the disease triangle, and this is we use this concept of a disease triangle to explain what is required for a disease to occur. So there has to be a favorable environment, and there has to be a susceptible host, which in this case would be a plant, and in our particular case, wheat. And then there has to be a virulent pathogen. That's a pathogen that is capable of causing disease. If any of these three factors is absent, disease will not occur. And so this slide shows a list of the common diseases of wheat that we see in Nebraska. And as I mentioned, there are three major groups of organisms or microorganisms that cause these diseases: the fungi, the bacteria, and the viruses. So among the fungal diseases, we have leaf spots, such as tan spot and septoria. And then we have the rusts, and the more common of the rusts are leaf rust and stripe rust. There is a third rust known as stem rust. We don't see much of it in Nebraska because most of the commercial varieties grown have good resistance to stem rust. And then we have the root and crown rots and Fusarium head blight, which affects the wheat heads. Then among the bacterial diseases, we see one major one, which is bacterial streak and black chaff. And there are several virus diseases. Wheat streak mosaic is the most important of these virus diseases. And then we also have triticum mosaic and wheat mosaic or high plains virus. Those three viruses are vectored by the wheat curl mite. And then we have wheat soilborne mosaic, which is vectored by a soilborne fungus-like organism. And we have also barley yellow dwarf, which is vectored by that virus. Barley yellow dwarf virus is vectored by aphids. So these are the diseases we see most commonly. But in this presentation, I will focus on fungal diseases, and specifically stripe rust and Fusarium head blight. And then when I talk about the seed treatments, I will talk about some of the soil-borne diseases that we also, and seed transmitted diseases that we encounter in Nebraska. So weather conditions in 2015, we had a very cool and wet spring, and these conditions are perfect for stripe rust. So we had a lot of stripe rust, and part of the reason is that there was very cool temperatures and plenty of moisture early in the growing season. In the summer, we had moisture and it was warm. These conditions favored Fusarium head blight and foliar diseases. And in the fall, right now, we have been on the dry side here in Nebraska and warm, and we have had some rain. And these conditions have actually favored development of stripe rust and leaf rust on wheat that was planted just a few weeks ago in September. So in just last week, we saw stripe rust and leaf rust on fall planted wheat in the Panhandle. So these warm conditions can actually cause some disease problems that will be can carry over into next year's season. So if it remains warm, the diseases like the virus diseases can infect more. We can have also fungal diseases like stripe rust and leaf rust that are infecting right now. But the more important ones that can affect the crop next year would be the virus diseases like wheat streak mosaic. If it's warm, infections in the fall are more frequent, and we end up with more serious problems in the next growing season. Also, soil-borne diseases, many of them tend to be more active, and infections take place when soil temperatures are warm. So if we remain warm, some of the soil-borne diseases will be more severe because they will have favorable conditions to infect for a longer time, and that will carry over into next year. So I will now switch gears and talk about the diseases we saw this year. As I mentioned, it was very cool and wet in the spring. That favored development of stripe rust, but those two conditions are not the only factors. We had a lot of spores blow up from the southern states. That's where the rust fungi overwinter because it's warmer there, so they overwinter on live plants in the south, and then the spores blow up in the spring into our region. So lots of spores blew up, and we had perfect conditions, and we had lots of varieties that are susceptible. So remember the disease triangle that I talked about earlier. So conditions were favorable for stripe rust, and this is a close-up of stripe rust. You can see, as the name implies, the stripes of yellow pustules along the leaf. So this is what it looks like. This disease can cause a lot of damage within just a short period of time. So this next slide illustrates this. So this was on May 19th at the Agricultural Research and Development Center near Mead, just about 30 miles north of Lincoln. This is a University of Nebraska research facility, and that's where I do my research. So on the picture in the top left shows stripe rust just starting to develop, and this was May 19th. 2 weeks later, on June 4th, I went to the exact same spot, and this is what I saw on the lower right of the screen. So stripe rust completely destroyed these leaves just within a span of 2 weeks, and that's how serious this disease can be. You can see on the lower right picture just the heads and the stems. Those are all that is remaining that is making photosynthesizing for grain fill. So in this situation, you end up with very, very poor yield. And this is what stripe rust looked like in growers' fields. This is in south central Nebraska on May 27th. And you can see the field is pretty much yellow just because all the foliage has stripe rust on it. And then in the southern Panhandle, again, this field had a lot of stripe rust, and stripe rust was actually widespread throughout the whole state. Now, this is leaf rust, which is different from stripe rust, and this was in west central Nebraska. And the reason that I saw this leaf rust that I'm showing you is that this was a state variety trial, and it has, usually we put a number of different lines, both released and commercial lines, in the state variety trial. So we had lots of different genetic backgrounds in the trial, and this particular variety is, as you can see, is resistant to stripe rust but susceptible to leaf rust. That's the reason I was able to find leaf rust. Otherwise, stripe rust, as you saw in the previous pictures, destroyed the foliage before any other foliar diseases showed up. So that's why we had mainly stripe rust and Fusarium head blight, just because stripe rust destroyed the leaves of most of the fields, wheat in the fields throughout the state before any other foliar diseases showed up. But for those that were resistant to stripe rust, we saw other diseases like leaf rust. So how do we manage stripe rust and leaf rust? We usually recommend fungicide application to protect the flag leaf. The flag leaf contributes the most to yield, and so fungicide treatment should be timed to protect the flag leaf. However, in conditions such as what we had in 2015, when disease pressure was very high, sometimes an earlier application would help to reduce damage. And then obviously Fusarium head blight comes later on, and I'll talk about that just in a little bit. So and then the second management strategy for stripe rust and leaf rust and actually other foliar diseases is to use resistant varieties. So commercial varieties are rated every year, and so before you choose your variety, note its resistance level. And what I would like you to note here is that a variety that may be resistant to stripe rust may be susceptible to leaf rust, just as I showed you in the previous picture, and vice versa. The other point I would like you to note is that the rust diseases, those fungi that cause the rust diseases, they can mutate and form new races that can overcome the resistance that we have currently. So as a variety that is resistant to stripe rust may become susceptible next year or the year after next year. So you have to keep that in mind when choosing varieties, and that's why we recommend usually to plant several different varieties that differ in their genetic backgrounds, and that way, if one turns out to be very susceptible to a particular disease, you may still get some yield from the other varieties. So this is Fusarium head blight. Let's talk about Fusarium head blight, which was the other widespread disease in Nebraska in 2015. This is a close-up of Fusarium head blight. This was on June 4th at the ARDC that I just talked about, the university farm. And at that time, I could see just one head here, one head there. It hadn't really, it wasn't showing up much yet. But so this is a close-up. The fungus survives on corn stubble and wheat stubble, sorghum stubble. And then in the spring, spores are released from the stubble. They infect the wheat head during flowering. And after infection, the fungus bleaches the head like this. And the fungus also produces a toxin known as vomitoxin. We call it also deoxynivalenol or DON, D-O-N. So this toxin, along with just the yield loss, can cause a lot of damage to the wheat crop and to the grower. So just this is June 21st, just about 2 weeks after the initial symptoms appeared. This is a field that is in southeast Nebraska, just maybe 5 miles south of the ARDC. And this field, you can see all the heads, most of the heads are bleached. And this is Fusarium head blight. We also call it scab. This field was a total loss. And there were many fields that were like this, and they were a total loss. So this is what Fusarium head blight can do when conditions are favorable. And this is another field. This one is in southwest Nebraska. The disease was prevalent in the eastern half of the state and in the southern 1/3 of the state. Those areas were all affected by severe Fusarium head blight. So this is what it looks like in the southwest. And so those bleached heads, when you get grain out of them, the grain looks like what you are seeing on the left side of the slide, the picture on the left here. These are Fusarium-damaged kernels or Fusarium-infected kernels. And so they contain the Fusarium fungus in them. If you plant this grain as seed before you clean it and before you treat it with a fungicide, then you end up with very severe seedling blights. And for those plants that survive, later on you end up with very severe root and crown rots. So one of the reasons we emphasize treating seed with fungicides. How do we manage Fusarium head blight? We can use crop rotation. As I mentioned, the fungus survives on corn stubble. It actually also causes stalk rots and ear rots in corn. But it survives on corn stubble, which is the best substrate for that fungus. But it also survives on wheat stubble and sorghum stubble. So crop rotation will help to non-hosts, and the best non-hosts would be broad-leafed legumes such as soybean. That would be a good non-host to rotate with. When you rotate with non-hosts, that stubble decomposes and the inoculum or the fungus population goes down, and then the next wheat crop is not exposed as much. And then we also have resistance to consider, but unfortunately there isn't very good resistance in wheat against Fusarium head blight. The best resistance we have is moderate resistance, and it's available just in a few varieties. Most varieties are susceptible. And so what we do is we apply a fungicide timed at early flowering. That's, as I mentioned before, infections take place at flowering. So we apply a fungicide at early flowering to suppress both Fusarium head blight and the vomitoxin. And at this time, there are 2 fungicide products that have been tested and been shown to be effective on Fusarium head blight and the vomitoxin. These are Prosaro and Caramba. So those 2 products are the ones we recommend to apply at early flowering to control Fusarium head blight and dawn. Okay, so now I will switch to the importance of weed seed treatments. And why treat seed? Treating seed will control seed-transmitted pathogens, residue-borne pathogens, soil-borne pathogens, and if the product is a combination of an insecticide and a fungicide, it will also control insect pests such as wireworms, Russian wheat aphid, and it will also control disease vectors. For example, aphids transmit Barley yellow dwarf. So if you treat seed with an insecticide fungicide combo, then you end up controlling indirectly Barley yellow dwarf, because for 2 to 3 weeks in the fall, that insecticide fungicide will be active in the plant, and it will control aphids as well as fungal diseases. And so overall, seed treatments will improve stand establishment. You end up with healthy, vigorous seedlings that will form a good stand, which increases the yield potential tremendously. And this is a list of some seed-transmitted diseases of wheat: loose smut, common bunt, black point, ergot, root rots and seedling blights, tan spot and septoria, leaf blotch. Tan spot and septoria, even though they are foliar diseases, they can also be transmitted by through seed. And residue-borne and soil-borne diseases, there are quite a number of them that sometimes we tend to ignore them because they are below the soil, but they cause significant damage. So common root rot caused by Fusarium and bipolaris, then Rhizoctonia root rot, Pythium root rot, Tecol, Fusarium root and crown rot, Cephalosporium stripe, and again tan spot, septoria, and Fusarium. Those are residue-borne diseases. So a bunch of diseases that are a very good reason for us to treat seed. So it's not just the common bunt and the smarts which the seed treatments control, but they will control all these diseases, and the over effect is you save a lot of yield loss. So you save a lot of yield, because if you don't, you can lose yield, but you may not even know that part of the yield that you are losing is due to these soil-borne diseases that normally you don't see. So these are pictures of some of these diseases. Starting in the upper left, that's loose smut, and then the next one is common bunt. So these 2 diseases, the fungi infect seed during germination, and then it grows within the plant, and when the head emerges and the grain forms on the head, the fungi, the spores, just replace the embryos in the flowers, in the florets, and you end up with just spores of this fungi instead of normal grain. Common band in particular, I would like to emphasize this one because common band, also known as stinking smut, you can't miss it. It smells like dead fish. This disease can cause a grower to lose 100% of the crop. The reason is if you have common band, the elevators will not accept your grain. And because it's very smelly, you can't really even feed it on to livestock either. So basically you end up with useless grain that you have to discard. And because of the potential for 100% loss, it is very worth it for you to spend that extra dollar to treat your seed and avoid a situation where you can lose your crop just because of common band. And the fungicides that we have on the market are very effective against the smuts and bands. Then the picture on the top right is black point. This is a disease that occurs during grain maturation and when it's wet, and we had a lot of wetness this year. So these are saprophytic fungi, but some of them are pathogenic. They grow on the surface of the wheat head because of the moisture. Then the mycelium makes its way to the grain. It infects the grain, and you end up with the embryo end of the grain blackened. So this grain is lowered, the quality is lowered, and usually it's downgraded during grading, and the quality of it will not be good for products like flour and products that are made from wheat flour. And then there's ergot. Right here you see the sclerotia of the fungus. The ergots, these sclerotia are very poisonous. If you have ergot in your grain, you have to clean it. Don't feed it to livestock. Don't use any products from a grain that has ergot, because the ergot fungus also produces some very poisonous toxins. The center picture shows a field with very severe root rot caused by several different fungi, and this is what you see when you don't treat your seed with fungicide before you plant. And then common root rot on the center right, it is just showing the close-up of symptoms, which it blackens the roots, and many of the other soil-borne pathogens will cause rotting of the roots like this. The bottom panel of pictures, I wanted to show you what the effect of the Fusarium fungus. This is from Fusarium head blight affected grain, and we tried to do a germination test on this grain, and in the center, in the bottom center, you can see almost zero germination from this grain compared to 100% germination from healthy grain. So that's, again, this emphasizes the importance of treating seed, cleaning seed and treating it with a fungicide before you plant. So the economic importance of seed and soil-borne transmitted diseases. Yield loss, reduced yield. Some of the yield you may not know that is being caused by the soil-borne diseases, but they do cause significant yield reduction when you don't treat your seed with fungicide. And then reduced grain quality. I just showed you some pictures of grain that is affected by some of these diseases. Grain rejection at the elevator. If you have a common band, the chances are almost 100% you'll not be able to sell your grain. If you have Fusarium head blight, if the vomitoxin is over 2 parts per million, the elevators will start discounting the price, and then above a certain level of vomitoxin, the elevator will not take your grain. It will reject your grain. The livestock can also reject this grain because if it may be smelly because of common band, or it may just not be palatable because of too much Fusarium-damaged kernels. And then there is the potential for explosions. The common band fungus, under the right conditions, it produces a chemical that can cause explosions. Fortunately, we have not seen any of that, but it's possible. The potential is there. And then the toxins that I mentioned, the Fusarium produces the vomitoxin, and ergot produces the alkaloids, which are very toxic both to livestock and humans.
Clearly, the funguses and pathogens are devastating to the wheat crop, and I've been talking with a couple people, a couple other plant pathologists, and there's the notion that there's only an increasing number of pathogens as we look to the future and deal with climate change and that type of thing, and the increasing global trade of seed and other commodities. So let's go ahead and transition over to Justin. And so Justin, Stephen talked a lot about the different diseases and funguses. What is BASF working on to help farmers deal with these challenges?
Yeah, thanks for the time, Julie, and I definitely appreciate Seed World and this opportunity to be on this webinar with you today, and I appreciate a lot of the stuff that Stephen went through, and I'll try to go through and highlight some of the things that growers and retailers and distributors may have known that we've had in the marketplace for a while, and kind of what we've done over time to build on those things. And I want to highlight some of our new innovations and developments today. As many seed treaters and growers may know, that over time BASF has had the Stamina line of fungicide seed treatment products in the market, mainly being behind that Stamina fungicide seed treatment, which is the solo product of pyraclostrobin, or people in industry may know it as F500, or that same active ingredient that they found in headline foliar fungicide for years. We use this product on a broad spectrum of crops to control a very broad spectrum of disease base, a lot of those that Stephen touched on. And for small grains, we have a recommended rate of 0.4 to 0.8 of an ounce per hundredweight of seed. One of the new developments that we have is our Stamina F3 cereal fungicide seed treatment. We've taken that Stamina mode of action and combined it with two additional modes of action, triticoniazole and also metalaxyl. Again, providing a wide range, an even wider range in this point of disease control activity. To dive a little bit deeper on Stamina F3 and give you a little bit more background information, it's a ready-to-use, easy-to-use formulation. So that means a grower can buy a jug of it and treat on his farm, or you can get your seed treated at a local seed treater right down the road from you. So it's very user-friendly for either a grower or a retail or distributor seed treatment operation. Some of the unique properties that it has in it, some of the formulation things that we've done, distribute that active ingredient within that root zone, and it basically forms a protective barrier around a lot of those young and growing roots to prevent a lot of those seed and seedling soil-borne pathogens that Stephen talked on a little bit earlier. It's available in a couple different package sizes, but the three active ingredients that we have in there, the first that we've already touched on, that pyraclostrobin, or that Stamina product, that F500 product, and again, we've teamed it up with triticoniazole, which is a triazole fungicide, and then also metalaxyl for those water mold or oomycete, those hard to control soil-borne pathogens. To give you a breakdown of how each of these three active ingredients fare against those most common seed and seedling diseases that growers see out there across the U.S. You can see in the first column we have Stamina, and then the next is triticoniazole, and then followed by metalaxyl. And you can see that one fungicide doesn't control every pathogen or every disease that a grower will see out there, that wheat crop or cereal crop will see in a growing season. So it's important to use a fungicide seed treatment like Stamina F3 that contains multiple modes of action. So we can see that the Stamina fungicide seed treatment alone does a really good job of controlling that common cast of characters, whether it's Rhizoctonia or Fusarium seedling diseases. Has some activity, some suppression on Pythium, a very hard to control pathogen found in multiple cropping systems. As you can see, we're able to pick up some common bunt with that. But for the most part, our triticoniazole, that's what we rely on our triazole fungicides for in these cereal crop seed treatment mixes, because those triazoles, they work to control those basidiomycetes, a lot of those smuts and bunts that Stephen touched on earlier. And then finally, a good quality fungicide cereal seed treatment has to have metalaxyl in it, because that way you're able to control Pythium, Phytophthora, those hard to control oil mycete pathogens that are out there. So again, the takeaway from this slide, you need to be looking at multiple modes of action to control that broad range of pathogens that you're going to see out there. And Julie just touched on it, where most pathologists think that we're actually going to see more pathogens as things develop, and as time goes on, we're actually just going to be challenged more and more with different pathogens out there in the environment. It's important to use a multiple mode of action product, such as Stamina F3 cereals. One of the bottom thing I want to call your attention to, didn't really touch on it much there in that slide, but we've seen some very impressive results and some unique benefits with what Stamina alone does, and we've carried this out on multiple crops, but we first really discovered it with Stamina as a solo product on wheat. We were seeing quicker, earlier germination, not just attributed to disease control, but kind of what we've termed as plant health. A lot of those stress tolerance benefits as well. We had a lot of reports of growers after we put this out in the market. Growers were coming back and they would have an early frost on spring wheat, and they were giving us reports of where only the Stamina side of the field survived, where they had applied Stamina to their seed treatment blend. And we carried that forward into Stamina F3. And here's some of the results, the amazing results that you can see with that. Under certain cold conditions, those early cold snaps that a grower may face in the Dakotas or somewhere where he's planting spring wheat, you can see from this greenhouse and growth chamber study that we did, the two photos on the lower left, where you have the untreated, and then compared to the Stamina F3 treated, you can see more plants, and they're larger and more vigorous. So again, as Stephen touched on, it's important to get that crop up early and get that stand established, because the first yield is determined, 60% of yield is determined within the first few weeks of wheat establishment. So it's important to make sure you get that early, quick establishment as soon as possible. And then finally, the photo on the lower right are some results that we had. Just again, those plant health benefits where we see larger biomass, whether that's roots or also top biomass in this case. Some photos from the field that came in last year. One of our local reps sent this photo in right down the road from Stephen there over in Nebraska. So we see here, you might not be able to tell too much from this, but we have untreated versus Stamina F3 in a field. You can see where that Stamina F3 side of the field is actually further along in its development, because of that quicker stand establishment, that weed is going to get to grain fill sooner, being able to increase that yield potential out there in that crop. Again, we took a trip this summer up in northern North Dakota, and again, similar type results that we saw this year on barley. So no matter the cereal crop, we see these results carry through the different crops. So this is on barley, where you see the Stamina F3 side of the field actually going to head sooner and earlier. So that quicker, earlier establishment actually pay off for a grower at the end of the season, which will translate into increased yield potential for him. And again, it's all about controlling those early season seedling diseases, getting that crop up, and then finally how it will pay off with increased yield potential. And there's some roots that we dug there in North Dakota compared to a popular competitive treatment that's on the market today, Stamina F3 cereals fungicide seed treatment. Again, you see some of those early season plant health benefits, where more plants there, more biomass, more top growth. Some very impressive pictures that we've gathered over the past year with this product. We have some very new developments that we help growers, retailers, and distributors pay attention to, that we're going to be launching over the next couple of years, new innovations into this cereals market. So it's a very important part of our portfolio, where we're launching a lot of new and very innovative things. So I'll just wrap up with this last yield slide. It's what it's all about, right? At the end of the day, this is looking at Stamina F3 cereals on different cropping systems across multiple years, across multiple sites. So we can see no matter what cereal crop you're growing, whether it's wheat, oats, or barley, we're seeing a yield increase compared to a competitive treatment. 1.5 bushels in wheat, 1.8 bushels advantage in barley, and then 4.6 in oats. Seeing some very impressive benefits, and I hope that everyone out there will take a chance and have a look at Stamina F3 cereals, because we see some very amazing things, whether it's those plant health benefits or that great broad spectrum seedling disease control that we see with Stamina F3. So with that, I'll say thank you, Julie, and turn it back over to you.
Thanks, Justin. How many field trials do you have across the U.S. looking at some of these various seed treatment products that are focused or targeted on the cereal crops?
Well, yeah, like I said, that's definitely a growing part of our business for us. So we have a lot this year. Like some of those pictures that you saw in the fields were those large plot side-by-side trials. I've actually got those out with a lot of business reps and sales reps across the country. So we get a lot of that information in, and probably hundreds of those around the country. As far as targeted research and development trials, I don't know, upwards of maybe 75, 100, something like that, with some new innovations that we're doing, and also continually building that information about Stamina F3 cereals.
Okay, great. I think Stephen has joined us back. Stephen, are you there? I'll try to come back to Stephen, and we'll see if we can get the last part of his presentation and then do a joint Q&A if that works for everybody.
So I left off on this slide. I was explaining about treating seed, and I was saying that it's best to buy certified treated seed or use a commercial seed service to clean seed, because they do it professionally, and you get seed that you don't have to worry to spend your time on cleaning yourself, and it's well treated. But if you treat yourself on farm, you need to thoroughly clean it before you treat, and you want to make sure that the entire surface of the seed is thoroughly covered with the seed treatment product, and that maximizes the effectiveness of the treatment. So I have a message to seed producers, and it is that it is extremely important for seed producers to treat seed before planting in a seed production field. This will avoid the risk of supplying contaminated seed to many customers. So if a seed producer doesn't treat seed and they happen to have a disease like common band, which has the potential for 100% loss, and then that seed is distributed to a number of customers, the consequences can be really serious for those producers. So it's really extremely important for seed producers to treat their seed before they plant in their seed production fields. And actually, that was the last slide, and I had a power surge. I don't have any more to talk about seed treatments, and I'm not going to go into the details of the individual seed treatments. Justin, I think, mentioned some Stamina from BASF, but there is a resource, the UNL Extension Weed Guide. I'm showing it here on the screen. If you go to that website address, it will take you to the 2015 Guide to Weed Management. In that guide, we have a section on diseases, and we also have a section on insects. So in the disease section, there is a list of seed treatment fungicides and also foliar treatment fungicides for wheat. And you can look at that resource. We just updated this guide to the next edition, which will be the 2016 guide, and that will be available in January. I think you pay about $15 to get access, but I can assure you that that $15 is well worth getting access to this guide. It has a lot of good information on weeds, insects, and pathogens.
Great, thank you, Stephen, and thanks for logging back in and joining us again. How does what's happening in Nebraska compare to the rest of the major wheat producing states here in the U.S.?
Well, as I mentioned in the at the beginning of the presentation, in Nebraska, we are unique in that we have a very variable climate, and so some years we can have very severe disease like we had this year. We had Fusarium head blight, and then the next 2 or 3, 4 years we don't have that situation. So I think that's one difference that we have in Nebraska. Just because of the variable climate, we don't see certain diseases consistently every year like some of the other wheat producing states see. And so I would say that's the biggest difference we have with other states.
And Justin, I'm going to pull you back in for the Q&A part of it too. So if anybody has any questions, I would recommend that you type those into the chat box now, and we'll make sure either Justin or Stephen have an opportunity to answer those questions. And so we know that we've had a change in the commodity environment with prices being lower, and people are looking to cut back on inputs in ways that they can kind of get the most out of every acre. What's your advice to those who are questioning whether a seed treatment or another input is maybe something that they can skimp on this year? And so we'll start with Justin and then go to Stephen. Sorry.
Yeah, one thing that you hear a lot of growers say is the yield potential for that crop is highest when that seed is in the tender or in the drill, right? So my advice is, and we see this every year in lots of different trials, whether it's small plot research, large plot, strip plots on growers' fields where seed treatments pay. Stephen and I went over lots of those early season seedling and soilborne diseases that have an impact. Maybe a grower's not looking for those. Maybe he's not going out and scouting every day and seeing how much stand loss he's losing from Rhizoctonia or Fusarium. So it's important to get that stand off to the quickest and best and healthiest start possible. So that's the reason I would definitely recommend using and relying on a fungicide seed treatment as it's a no-brainer in my book.
Stephen, do you have anything to add to that?
Yes. What I wanted to add is that seed treatments are extremely inexpensive compared even to foliar fungicides because they are applied in very small quantities to the seed, and they are really inexpensive, but they are very effective in controlling some of these diseases that can cause the grower 100% loss. Here in Nebraska, since I've been here, we have seen situations where growers lost entire fields just to common bunt, just because they didn't treat, and it would have cost them just a few dollars per bushel to treat seed and have their yield. So to me, even just the fact that seed treatments are so inexpensive, and you have to approach the whole situation as insurance. Just consider it insurance. If you don't pay and you have several hundred acres, and do you want to lose those because you didn't spend a few $100s to treat seed, and it's actually probably cheaper than a few $100s.
Thank you. One of the things that kind of piqued my interest, Stephen, is when you were talking in recognizing that there are not very many resistant varieties to some of these diseases. Are you working with plant breeders or to further develop varieties that are resistant to some of these funguses and diseases?
Yes, actually, here at the University of Nebraska, I work with Dr. Banzinger, Stephen Banzinger. He's our small grains breeder, so he breeds mostly wheat, but he also breeds some triticale and barley and oats. But I work with him on developing varieties with resistance to Fusarium head blight, stem rust, and leaf rust. So all his lines that are in the advanced nurseries, we screen them in the greenhouse for Fusarium head blight, stem rust, and leaf rust, and then we go and screen them further in the field. And so since I've been here, he has released several varieties with resistance to various diseases. The most known one that most people who grow wheat in Nebraska know is Overland, which was the most popular variety when it was released for the last several years, and it has very good resistance to Fusarium head blight, and it had very good resistance to stripe rust, but the rest that we had this year changed, and so that resistance broke down a little bit. But in short, yes, I work with Dr. Bansinger to breed for resistant wheat varieties.
Okay, great. Well, that's good to know that the plant pathologists are working in coordination with the plant breeders to develop some varieties that can better withstand these types of pests and pathogens. Justin, I hate to put you on the spot, but I'm going to do it anyways. Can you give us any insight as to what BASF is working on or what they have in their pipeline that might be able to help growers, better protect their crop and with the cereal seed?
Sure, yeah, I can tell you, but then I would have to kill you. No, I'm joking. We have some very innovative things, and not to get too far down the road, I think we have some all-in-one answers for what no matter the dilemma or pest or disease a grower will be facing. And so, like I said earlier, you're going to see some very innovative products come out from BASF just starting over the next year and continue out for the next several years. So again, we have some very innovative things coming out, so just stay tuned and be on the lookout for those things.
So stay tuned is the message. All right, yes. Well, thank you. And one last question, Stephen. I had been talking with some plant pathologists down at the University of Florida, and they had said that the number of pathogens that farmers have to cope with is only increasing in the coming future. And so I was wondering if you could speak to that a little bit, and what we might expect over the course of the next 5 to 10 years in dealing with these things.
I would agree with that observation. The major factor that is causing this is obviously we have had quite a bit about climate change. And with the time, we are getting warmer and warmer temperatures, and pathogens and diseases, they are favored by warmer temperatures. If it's very cold, most of these microorganisms will not grow and multiply. So the warmer it gets, the wetter it gets, because we have been having moisture, we are having all these floods and everything like that. So I'm not surprised that somebody said that. I think disease problems are going to increase, but we are fortunate that we have companies like BASF, Bayer Crop Science, Syngenta. They are working to develop products that we can use to protect our crops from diseases. So I think the grower just has to be prepared to deal with this and have a toolbox of strategies and tactics to deal with these diseases as they increase and as they emerge. But with the chemical companies giving us these tools, like seed treatments and foliar treatments, I think we can sustain agricultural production in the next even couple of decades without seeing very drastic changes.
Thank you, Stephen. I think that's all the questions we have, and I know we're also running out of time. So I want to thank our speakers for making time in their busy schedules to share their insight and expertise. I hope that you have found this information of value. And again, I want to thank our sponsor, BASF, for their support. And I'd also like to thank my team working behind the scenes. And this presentation will be made available on seedworld.com. Thanks for your attention, and on behalf of the team here at SeedWorld, we hope you have a great rest of the day.